All right, well, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name is Jackson, and every week I recap all of the newly released albums that I listened to in the week prior. I will review each of them, give them all a score from 0 to 10, and I'm doing that again this week. And it's a big video coming up here. There were a lot of big releases last week that at least I listened to from folks like Charli xcx, The Strokes, Wolfhard, and Steve Lacy, just to name a few. I listened to a lot of new music last week. It just worked out well for me, and I've actually got a good bit of ground to cover today. So if you skip around a little bit in this video, if you use those chapters below to find the albums you're looking for, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I get it. It's a bit of a longer video today, so feel free to do as you want here. But let's just jump right into it because I do not want to waste any more time. All right, so the first album I listened to last week actually was an EP. It wasn't a full-length album, and that was Movement. It was the latest EP from Slenderbodies. Now, I believe this was last Sunday when I listened to this one, and I actually needed a short listen due to just having very little time to listen to anything. And this EP met exactly the criteria I was looking for. It's a 12-ish minute record, so it's not all that long. And it was short and sweet. It was to the point, and honestly, it was a solid listen. It was really tightly played and executed, which is always a breath of fresh air, given how much is overly bloated these days, especially in the realm of pop and whatnot. That's besides the point. And honestly, I was left wanting more, which is a good thing, given it was only 12 minutes. I was really left wanting more from it. I really enjoyed the production and the vocals. The vocals specifically grew a bit old, but it wasn't anything I couldn't get over, especially, again, since it was 12 minutes long. And in the vocal realm, it was pretty unique. I'll leave it at that. It was a unique vocal experience. The jazz elements of the record were really nice, and if you listen to this one, you'll catch on to that immediately. But at the same time, it was a pretty easy listening album. On the flip side of that coin, though, it was also very meticulously made. There was a lot of care put into the details of this album, which was really, really nice. And again, it was just 12 minutes, but a lot of care was put into those 12 minutes. So I gave this one a 7 out of 10. I was left wanting more, so I'll be going back to whatever the band here puts out next. Next up was Oh Yeah by Steve Lacy, the latest release from old Lacy, and I really enjoyed what he put out here. I'm so glad that he chose to have the record be so vocally centric. That was absolutely the right move, and the care and the genuine detail that went into these vocals on many, if not most of the tracks was totally evident. The harmonies and vocal stacks were super enjoyable, and the influence of folks like the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson could really be felt, especially on that opening track. I love that opening track. I keep coming back to it, but there's also a few songs throughout that I keep coming back to. The production was really great. I wasn't totally blown away by it for the most part, but it was really solid. And I especially loved when there was a more electric feel and a more electric sound incorporated. Even though that wasn't quite the norm, those moments were really effective to me. I wish there had been more there. But again, that just made it more effective. Lyrically, I think there were a few moments that took me out of the album, but those were few and far between. In the same breath, there were lyrical moments that honestly made me laugh a little bit. It was kind of silly at times in a good way. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm very pleased with what was put out here. It honestly kind of blew my expectations out of the water a little bit. I didn't totally vibe with the singles, although I vibe with them more in the record as a whole. So very pleased. This was a good listen. I've been listening to it throughout the entire week. So I'm very pleased with this. This one earns a 7.9 in my book, a 7.9 out of 10. So very solid release. Next up was Monkey Mind by Pearl and the Oysters. I think this one had been out for a couple weeks before I got to listening to it last week. And while it's certain I really didn't vibe with most of this record, But I can say for certain that there are absolutely a few songs here that I really enjoyed, and they will be on repeat during the fall Halloween time frame. They match that vibe perfectly in a really like unique and enjoyable kind of way. But again, that wasn't most of the record, so I didn't vibe with most of the record. Really, you can group the songs on this album into two main categories. There are songs that were really stripped down from a production standpoint, and then there were songs that were really, really produced, especially in compared to those others. Now, the songs that were stripped down were absolutely the sweet spot for the duo here. You would really have, soft vocals paired with one or two other really soft and retro electronic instruments, and it made for such a perfect feel and such a perfect atmosphere on those tracks. And then you had the others when they tried to make a more produced and more intricate feel. It was definitely an attempt at making something more complex, and those fell really, really flat for me, unfortunately. I left those really wanting more stripped down ones. So I would hear a stripped down one, you'd hear one of the others, and I'd just be like, man, why can't they just do more of the stripped down songs? Now, the vocals were quite nice. I think that was consistent throughout the album, and the electronic aspects that they incorporated with that retro feel also were really nice. Think like Jack Stauber at times. So overall, as far as the quality of the album goes, I think their direction just needs a little more direction. I think they need more direction as a whole, or at the very least a shift in direction. I think they need to really nail down what they want to do before their next album. But at the same time, with that sort of change, I could absolutely see them making a really stellar album, especially in that realm of that retro electronic feel. So this one gets a 5.4 out of 10 for me. There was a lot going for it, of course, but not enough, unfortunately. Next up is a name of an album and a band that I hopefully will not butcher, and that is Morir, Saltando by Hesse, Kassel. Now, it is not an English album, which is why I struggled with that. But let me tell you, from start to finish, this album is one thing, and it is very clearly one thing, and that is wildly bold. It is a insanely bold album in the best sort of way. I mean, the opening track was a 15-minute display of force that was so far from what I expected. And that opening track, for the record, is such an odyssey of a song. At times it was a little too much for me, but still, it was such a journey, and it absolutely set the tone for the album in a perfect way. It's such a hardcore album. It's heavy rocking, and the production is so unbelievably chaotic, but it is so controlled, especially if you're listening closely. The guitar tone was super perfect too. This stuck out to me song after song. I was just loving the choice of guitar tone there. It really had a sort of post-punk feel that reminded me a lot of some of my favorite albums and bands from Russia and Eastern Europe in that realm. And that was awesome to me. I love that sound. The vocals were so interesting. They were grainy and uncontrolled, and it added to this bold, hardcore feeling in the best sort of way. Now, again, like I mentioned, there are moments where it was over the top, especially in the vocal range. There were a few moments that I was left thinking, okay, this is a little too much. But if you listen to this album, those moments are so few and far between that it's impressive. It's really impressive. It just felt so chaotic and insane as a record. But this band managed to toe the line in a pretty amazing way, while they rarely crossed into super unenjoyable territory. It was so noisy in the best sort of way. And altogether, I was left just amazed at this record. I was totally amazed. So this one earned an 8.7 out of 10 for me. That might be one of the highest. Oh, I know it's one of the highest. It might be the highest on this channel so far. Not my highest rated album ever, of course. I do have my 10s, which I mentioned in my first video. But I think as far as the new albums that I have reviewed so far, this one might be the highest. Not my highest reviewed on the year, but on this channel, yeah. So very impressive work here. If you're into that sort of punk, hardcore, noise rock feel, you absolutely have to listen to this album. I'm not giving you a choice. You got to listen to it. Next up was a very, very different album, and that was Fire from the Hip by Finn Wolfhard. So it was Wolfhard's second studio album from the actor-musician, and I came away with just a few unfortunate problems at the forefront of my mind with this album. For starters, it just seems that there's way too many things that Wolfhard is trying to do. Now listen, variety in the sound of an album is something that is really, really needed. It's what separates good albums from bad albums, and it's just something I'm pretty much always looking for, right? That variety is what keeps albums from getting stale and old, especially when they get a little longer than 20 minutes. If every song sounds the same, it's boring, it doesn't work. So variety in sound is a really good and honestly necessary thing. However, in the case of this album, there's just too much at play here. There are too many different genres that he's trying to play in, and it's so much so that I can't really get a good feel into what he's trying to do with this album. Aside from maybe the last 3 tracks or so, the last stretch of the album, he gets his footing a little bit there, but for the most part, it's just kind of all over the place. I think primarily we're looking at songs that pull from like indie rock and indie pop. Then you also get songs that feel like a Weezer style nerd rock. And then of course, those last 3 tracks and a couple others sprinkled in have a sort of indie, country, and folk feel. And again, that becomes the more dominant force in the last stretch of the album, but it's only for a few songs. Juggling so many genres has been done before, and it's been done well before. I mean, think about the Beatles' White Album. There's an unbelievable amount of sounds going on there, and that works. But in this case, it really just doesn't. It seems that Wolfhard really cared the most for those country songs, and those were the songs that I ended up enjoying the most. But the issue I have with that is that I can tell. I know that he seemed to care for those the most. If I'm listening to a record, I shouldn't be able to tell which songs an artist put more care into than others. I just shouldn't. Now, those non-country tracks aren't horrible, but they do just feel a little sloppy and uninteresting, which becomes my second issue here, which is there are plenty of moments that are rough around the edges in a really not so enjoyable way. There's just too many sloppy moments for me to kind of get over. Lastly, my final issue of the main 3 I came away with were that the vocals were just rarely enjoyable. And honestly, I only found myself enjoying the vocals on this album when the backing vocals came in a big way. For the record, I think those backing vocals melded really perfectly with his vocals, especially on those country tracks. I think they worked super, super well, but as a whole, those vocals were just tough for me, especially on those that leaned towards more rock and pop. I think Wolfhard could have been onto something here, especially with those country songs, but he was trying to do too much here, and I think he just needs more direction. If he has that, maybe something better can come out of it. But for now, this album gets a 4.8 for me. Next up was The Construct by Victor Jones, a guy who I discovered last year and became one of my favorite new artists. He released a new full-length studio album last week. I think it was last week, maybe it was the week before. But I listened to it last week. It was recent. Now, setting the stage for this, if you've never heard of Victor Jones, this won't mean anything to you. Most of you probably haven't. He's not super big. But it is worth noting, for me, as somebody who's been keeping up with the guy, over half the songs on this album had already been released as singles in the last year and a couple months. I think the oldest one on the album had been released 14 or 15 months ago, give or take. And that is something that worked both for and against this album as a whole. So it's a mixed bag. Now, for starters, some of my favorite songs of last year were on this album. Songs like I Get Hurt, Mother Teresa, and Shoulder Song, which I think is the oldest song on the album, all were featured here, and I loved those songs. I Get Hurt made my top 50 songs of the year last year. In my Jackson Likes Music Awards, Victor Jones got Best New Artist. So I was very, very into what he was doing last year. Now, on the other hand, some of my least favorite songs that Jones has put out were on this album too. Songs like The Sun from Underwater and Go to Work, which I used to like Go to Work a lot more when it first came out. It's gotten old for me. It got old very quickly. But the issue here is that I already knew that I liked and didn't like those songs. If it was just the songs I'd liked, it'd be okay. But I already knew that there were songs on here I wasn't going to enjoy. That's not a good thing. I think having a lot of singles preceding an album like this, it's happened before, but I just don't usually appreciate it. It happens a lot, actually. But it just doesn't always work like I think artists want to. But I think what really works against it here even more so than usual is the fact that those singles had been out for so long. My opinions on 6 out of the 11 songs on that album were already super, super firm. And again, that's over half. Over half the album were songs I already knew and had firm opinions on. There were 5 new tracks here that were put out, and I enjoyed some. Others I just didn't really care for. I do think Jones's music is at its best when it matches the total insane energy that he brings. And really what I mean by that is when it's loud and electronic. When the music is loud and electronic, Victor Jones is at his best. So among those new tracks, there was a real mixed bag of sounds. I just didn't find any of them to be super effective, aside from moments in String Lights that felt like Talking Heads a little bit, and similarly with Saved, though I like that one significantly less than the other. I do think a few risks were taken. I'm just not sure they paid off. The truth is, when I listen to Victor Jones, I'm listening for heavy electronic noise, backing lyrics that are meaningless or at best heavily convoluted. The other stuff he tries can occasionally work for him, like Shoulder Song does, but even that song has a huge build that explodes into noise. So largely here it just didn't work, at least for the new songs and the songs I already knew about. Still, a lot of the singles that I already knew managed to save the day in a big way. My score here, though, is a 4.9. If you're into Talking Heads, if you're into loud electronic noise, give it a listen. I mean, there's a lot still worth listening to here. It's just a little more difficult for me, having already been a fan of Victor and having already loved and not so much loved a lot of the songs here. Next up was Open Doors, the latest EP by Sea of Lettuce. Now, I have listened to some of the band's work here, and this is pretty much exactly what I would have expected for Sea of Lettuce's latest release. It was stripped down, easy listening, mostly acoustic indie pop with little care for anything else. With that said, I do think this EP took that style and those ideas to a new, better level. It was honestly even more stripped down than I had anticipated, and that's not a bad thing. I think the album was made really well, and it was really easy to listen to as a whole. I think releasing it as an EP was the right call because the sound does feel a little similar throughout the short listen, so if there had been any more, it probably would not have been nearly as effective, but on a 4-track EP, it works. If you're looking for something easy listening, it would be worth giving this one a listen, maybe putting it on in the background or just truly listening to it, if that's your vibe. My score for this one was a 6.4. Next up is a big one, and that is Reality Awaits by The Strokes. The latest Strokes album is finally here. I was excited for it. I've seen a lot of opinions on it, but I was just left wondering why we needed it in the first place. As excited as I was, as much as I wanted some more Strokes music, I left this album wondering, did we really need it? That's not a good thing. I mean, I think we all had an idea as to what to expect thanks to the singles, But I was holding on to some hope that the rest of the album would be an improvement, especially when they delayed the release. I was thinking surely they're taking some criticisms to heart. They are trying to make some improvements. They didn't. I mean, it wasn't much of an improvement at all. Of course, the big thing that everyone is talking about, and the big thing that's the easiest thing to latch on to, are the vocals, which were a really mixed bag. But again, I expected that thanks to the totally rampant autotune on the singles. And if anything, I think there ended up being less poor use of autotune than I actually expected. So maybe that's kind of a plus. I do think, honestly, though, it's kind of the bare minimum given Casablancas can actually sing. So what's the reason for it? It was unnecessary, or at the very least, the degree to which it was used was unnecessary. I mean, he sounded like Machine Head from Invincible. That's a little too much at times. I mean, he didn't sound like that the whole record, but he did at times, and that's obviously too much. Now, with that out of the way, that's of course the big thing everyone's talking about. I do think it's worth noting that I actually really enjoy Going Shopping. I really started enjoying that track a couple days after it came out. It clicked for me. I started really liking it. And now you might be asking, why am I bringing this up? And well, that's because the song has really horrible, egregious, Machine Head type autotune on it. And I still like it. So the point I'm making is the autotune didn't have to ruin the album as a whole, or even the songs that it was on for me. In fact, I can actually get over it if everything else about the song works. If it's as good as Going Shopping, and if it's redeemable as Going Shopping was to me, it can work. However, the rest of the album, with maybe 2 exceptions, just doesn't do anything to redeem itself. Even the songs without the autotune were just so unbearably boring to me that there just legitimately wasn't anything keeping my attention. I mean, it was so boring, it was so uninteresting. I was looking for something in every song to latch onto and to think, wow, this is awesome, and I just couldn't find it. The instrumentation was fine and far from poorly made, but again, it was just boring. I left this record so unbearably far from being convinced that this album needed to exist. Maybe my opinion will change, but at the time of filming this, I am pretty disappointed. So this one gets a 4.5 out of 10. Not what I wanted to give the newest Strokes album, but here we are. Next up, and the last album I listened to last week, was Music, Fashion, Film by Charli xcx. Her newest release, another heavily anticipated one from just about everybody since Brat came out. Now look, I am far from being blown away here, but I'm also far from disappointed. It's that weird in-between area, which maybe you've experienced it too, where you're just like, okay, this was not bad at all, but I just didn't love it, and I'm looking for something to rave about, and I can't really find it. Maybe you've been there, and honestly, sometimes that's worse than the other 2 options, the I really loved it or I really hated it. Sometimes being in limbo like that is worse. I mean, being left with no strong opinions isn't exactly a good thing, especially when it's clear that the artist is capable of a lot more, even if that capability goes in both directions, good and bad. I enjoyed a lot of the heavier electronic sounds that were featured here, though as much as I wish it had been, that sound really wasn't the norm. It's more of a feature of certain tracks. Even still, those other tracks weren't bad or even super boring. It was honestly interesting enough to keep me somewhat engaged, even if that's the bare minimum that I expect. I do think it was lacking lyrically at times, with moments that felt kind of clunky and a little misguided as far as the direction she seemed to want to go with the album. But for the most part, that wasn't the norm either. I also do think it's worth pointing out that SS26, Spring Summer 26, has got to be one of her absolute best tracks in recent history, if not ever. I think even taking Brat into consideration, that song, which that's just one song out of the whole album, of course, but that song blew me away. I really have been loving it. So regardless of that, that doesn't speak to the quality of the whole album, of course, but it's clear to me that she can do better than this. She can also do worse, but she can do better. But it's not abysmal. It's not the worst thing I listened to last week or anywhere near it, honestly. It was just fine. So this one gets a 6.1 out of 10 for me. All right, well, we made it through. It was a lot of albums. If you skipped around, good for you. If you didn't, I appreciate you making it with me the whole way. But that wraps up my week in listening. As always, please make sure that you like and subscribe. Hit the bell so you don't miss a single video. Keep an eye out for the next installment in my Top 500 Songs Ever series. That will be coming out sometime this week. Also, if you want to connect anywhere else, hit up my socials. I am pretty active, fairly active, on Instagram and TikTok. Love talking music anywhere and everywhere. They're all linked below. There's also a few other playlists and things linked below. So check out those links. If there's anything that interests you, hit them. And I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.